One of the things Richard used to talk about was the 30% model, where he said that if a person loses 30% of their skin, there's a good chance they're going to die. And if a tree loses 30% of its bark, there's a good chance that it's going to perish as well. And he speculated from there that if the Earth lost 30% of its vegetative cover, then we'd probably be in dire straits. At a local level, we are way past that. The wheat belt's been 97% cleared, and the areas adjoining it are under serious threat from lots of other degrading forces. Globally, we're also way past that 1/3 limit, so as they say in the West, go figure. From there, we've got a lot of work to do. I've tried to resist the temptation of putting in the classic wheat belt shot of the flat salt pan valley floor, which the West Australian loves so much. This is in the good part of the wheat belt. This is the western wheat belt down between Wagen and Narrogin. There's a lot in this photo. We've got trees from South America, we've got trees from Europe, we've got grasses from the Mediterranean, we've got grasses from South Africa, we've got spiny rushes which have been imported from Europe, we've got lots of erosion, we've got collapsed soil structure, we've got salinisation, we've got a whole pile of rocks that used to be lizard habitat that have been picked up and turned into a house for a temporary dwelling. That's fallen down. And we've got a whole stream of rubbish coming down here. We've got decline in the few remaining native trees we've got up here, and even death in the exotic trees. There's probably a scattering of rabbits through there as well, and the foxes that come in to prey on those. Who did this? Any guesses? Me. I did this. I'm as guilty as anybody else. Is anybody else prepared to put up their hand? Because we did this because we believed it was the right thing to do at the time. I think this is a really powerful photo. This came out with some work that Tom Lyons from Murdoch University did. The white blob is the wing of a plane. This is a photo looking down the rabbit-proof fence. On one side, what's colloquially known as UCL, unallocated Crown land, which means the bit that we haven't decided what to do with yet. On the other side is the wheat belt, that hugely prosperous area that we're so proud of. These are clouds. These clouds didn't blow in from the other side. They're actually forming over this. This is a product of albedo and reflectance and particulates, and the atmospheric science in Tom's papers are a little bit mind-boggling. They're very impenetrable, but the conclusions that he draws are quite interesting. If you ain't got no bush, you can't have rain. The rainfall hasn't changed on this side of the fence since we've been measuring it. On this side of the fence, rainfall's gone down 20% in the last 30 years. There's two sides of that fence, and we have to have two different strategies for managing them. On the eastern side of the fence, we've got what's now called the Great Western Woodlands. It's the single biggest woodland remaining in the world, and it's under incredible threat. It's under threat from feral animals, introduced plants, recreational four-wheel drive use. Probably the single biggest risk is fire, changed fire regimes. We need to resist wholesale applications for strip mining, exploration of these areas. It means we need to resist proposals that would increase the level of grazing. These are existing problems that we need to deal with rather than things that we should be planning to increase in the future. For the other side of the fence, we've got, unfortunately, a much bigger job. It's one that the economists would tell us to walk away from because it's not economic to do anything about. I would argue that we have a moral responsibility to do something about it because we're the ones that made the mess in the first place. And that means looking beyond us as a species. It means saying because it's of no longer of any use to us, then we're done with it and we can walk away. But I don't think that's really fair to all the other things that are out there. Linking the bits that are already there, and there are a few tiny fragments left, but preserving those is still going to be the cheapest revegetation that we are going to have. And then working out from there, linking and buffering and being strategic in what we do revegetate. We also need to come to grips with the scale of the job. The scale of the job is massive, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. So how we motivate people to work in an environment that's almost entirely in private ownership. Much of my work's been in response to this, to say that because these people are economically driven, probably the only way we're going to change their thinking is to develop commercial tree crops, which can combine the two things at the one time. And this became a case of systematically working through what the options were. Things needed to be suited to extensive planting. That is, we needed to have enough seed available, and they needed to be things that could be produced reasonably cheap. So getting a commercial return from the bulk of these plants, which allows us to roll over money to keep the job going and achieve some of the functional mimicry of what the original vegetation was, became a fairly pressing driver for the work that I was doing at the time. The quest for super plants. Everybody wants this one plant which is going to make everybody rich and happy and restore the environment and do all these things. We see it a bit in blue gums, we see it a bit in oil mallees, even at Australian native plant level. Mont were guilty of planting Tagasasti all down the road verges. Well-intentioned. There's this thinking that says any plant is a good plant, any plant is better than no plant. There was a big push to try and introduce more prosopis. This is a genus of trees that is native to every continent except Australia around the world. They're a nitrogen-fixing tree, they're used for fodder, they're used for shade, they're used for timber. But in that genus, there's also some of the most noxious weeds that exist. There's about 23, 24 species, something like that in the genus. And there's been repeated calls for us to introduce prosopis into Australia. It is here, it was used in Australia. Anyone who's been up to Marty Station in the Pilbara will know that there's uncontrolled thickets of prosopis marching across the landscape, and they are now considered uncontrollable, and we're just computer mapping where that infestation is going to go. The bottom line is there's nothing that prosopis will do that can't be done with our acacias. Our acacias are not going to become weedy, they're going to support our local ecologies at the same time. And we've got all the gene pool to go with them. We're not doing the development work with our acacias, but people still want us to introduce other plants, even though the developmental work has not been done in the country of origin of these plants, which I find quite extraordinary. We're now talking about what are the cultural implications of this work as well. So let's talk about getting tree crops in place that actually suit what we want to do as a community. If you take a wheat belt farmer and they put in 1 hectare of olive trees, that's that whole family flat out for a period of time in the year, picking, pruning, processing those olives. What do they do with the other 9,999 hectares of land that they've got? We don't have the labour force out there, and we don't have the ecological carrying capacity to stack that landscape with the people that can justify having those sort of industries. At the same time, we're reliant on a whole range of non-sustainable sources for our industrial products. So that's where things like the oil mallees come in as substrates and feedstocks for our industrial products as well. Some of the constraints that I've seen or dealt with in my journey, I suppose, on the way, I found it very difficult over the last 20 years to be working in forestry in an agricultural environment. The foresters didn't believe in what I was doing because I wasn't growing tall, straight trees to put through the sawmill. The agriculturalists didn't want to know about me because I wasn't growing an agricultural crop. The other thing that makes it difficult is what I'm going to call ecosystem collapse. We've all heard of dieback. We've now heard of Wandoo decline, Rudis decline, red gum canker, Chewett dieback, Jarrah dieback. But nobody talks about ecosystem decline. They're all symptoms of the same thing. Soil structures collapsing, acidification of the soils, all of which, that state of imbalance, makes it more complex and more difficult to re-establish systems in these places, which again makes me say the most important thing is to buffer and preserve what's left first, to grab that while we can. So we can't impose these systems on people. They have to be driven by the people who are going to live there and look after them and use them. So that's it, I think. Questions?